Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are unpacking a totally fascinating ancient debate. We're diving deep into some seriously old academic texts that basically tried to decode the mechanics of human desire. Specifically, they were looking at the fundamental differences between male and female pleasure. It's a wild journey into how ancient scholars actually tried to mathematically and biologically categorize human intimacy. So, how did these ancient scholars actually study desire? Well, centuries ago, human intimacy wasn't just left to poets and romantics. It was actually the subject of really rigorous, systematic academic study. These scholars wanted to decode the human body, its temperament, and its reactions with the exact precision of a hard science. They debated, they hypothesized, and as we're going to see, they violently disagreed with each other a lot of the time. Okay, here is our roadmap for the explainer today. We'll start with number 1, the 3 paces of desire. Then 2, the great gender debate. 3, the friction hypothesis. And finally, number 4, the psychology of pleasure. All right, let's jump right into section 1, the 3 passes of desire, where we establish the baseline of timing. So these ancient texts established a baseline that treats both genders with this surprising amount of structural equality. They claimed that both men and women fall equally into 3 distinct paces of sexual timing: quick, medium, and slow. Or, as the original text bluntly puts it, those who finish quickly, those who take a long time, and those who fall comfortably right there in the middle. The big takeaway here is that pacing is treated as a universal human variable, totally regardless of gender. And they approach this with a completely mathematical mindset. You've got 3 speeds for men, 3 for women, which means there are exactly 9 possible combinations of sexual timing in any relationship. It's like a giant puzzle for compatibility. 2 quick-paced partners? Well, that's one type of dynamic. A slow-paced man and a quick-paced woman? That's a totally different one. Moving right along to section 2, the great gender debate. This is where we get into the major dispute among these ancient scholars. Now, all of this categorization leads to one incredibly fierce academic dispute centered around a single question. Do men and women actually experience climax and pleasure in the exact same way? Like, even if a man and a woman are both categorized as slow or quick, does that ultimate peak of the experience, physically and emotionally, feel the same for both of them? Well, enter an ancient scholar named Adalaki. He forcefully argued that no, the experiences are fundamentally asymmetrical. According to his theory, because women lack shukra, which is the ancient term for semen, their physical experience of climax literally must be entirely different. His whole argument was basically, you simply cannot have the exact same physical sensation of release without the exact same biological mechanism of release. So in this specific ancient view, the male experience of pleasure is strictly defined as an endpoint. It's a momentary, fleeting event that is inextricably tied to physical release. It builds up, it peaks for just a moment at the very end, and then, well, it's over. Which naturally brings us to section 3, the friction hypothesis, looking at the biological theory of the ancients. To explain the gap between male and female experiences, the texts introduced this concept called konduti. They understood this as a natural physical itch or urge located within the female anatomy. So the ancient scholars hypothesized that this wasn't an endpoint release at all, but actually a continuous physical state, and it was a state that demanded continuous release through friction. And get this, the ancient acharyas proposed a surprisingly microscopic theory for this. They literally believed that extremely small, microscopic entities living within the anatomy were what caused this persistent itch. Because of that, physical friction wasn't really about romance. In their purely academic view, it was a biological, physiological necessity just to soothe this specific itch. To make this incredibly clear, the source text uses a highly specific and, let's be honest, deeply unromantic metaphor. They literally compared the physical act of intimacy to using a small wooden stick to relieve a really annoying itch inside your ear. Yeah, a remarkably clinical way to view romance, right? But thankfully, the debate absolutely did not stop there. Because think about it. If intimacy was really just about relieving a biological itch with the equivalent of an ear stick, where does the real joy come from? Why do we see it as beautiful? Why do human beings seek it out way beyond mere biological maintenance? That glaring gap is what finally pushed these ancient scholars toward a much deeper realization. And that brings us to our final section, the psychology of pleasure, where everything finally comes together in a final synthesis. Their answer to that gap is Abhimanika Sukha. This represents the psychological joy of intimacy. It's the pleasure that comes from affection, kissing, embracing, and just the feeling of being desired. The text argues that it's actually this psychological element that elevates the mere physical friction into something profoundly greater. So the text concludes that true pleasure is really a compounded synthesis. It's a step-by-step formula. Step 1. You take the physical relief of Kondottu Sukha. Step 2, you add the emotional joy of Abhimanika Sukha. And step 3, they basically chemically react to create a completely unique, continuous state of holistic happiness. It's a totally new flavor of joy. And this just beautifully summarizes their final contrast. On one hand, you have the ancient view of male pleasure, a momentary, endpoint climax inextricably tied to a physical release. But on the other hand, you have the final synthesis of female pleasure, a continuous, holistic journey of emotion and physical touch from the very start to the very finish. So, I'm going to leave you with this final, rather provocative thought. Centuries ago, these scholars tried to reduce human intimacy to pure math and biology, only to realize that they couldn't actually explain human joy without deep emotional connection. So, how much has our understanding of the deeply intertwined nature of physical friction and emotional intimacy really evolved since this ancient debate? And honestly, how much did they get incredibly right?